No! I'm the one who says things.
So here tonight with Dustin Miller, PolyInnovator. We connected up, and he has some things he'd like to share about being a PolyInnovator and all the good things he does. So what exactly is a PolyInnovator? We'll just start right there.
Yeah, that's a good way to start. PolyInnovator is based off of the idea of being a polymath of innovation. And a lot of people may not know that term either, but my whole goal was to innovate many different areas in life. So whether that means education or gaming or swimming, that kind of thing, there's tons of topics I plan on going into. I wanted to create a foundation for my life. And so every career that I had can be built upon this foundation. And so every phase could have a start, so to speak.
As opposed to, help me out here.
Yeah. So whenever people end up thinking about their life, they think about it like, okay, I'm going to go to college. I'm going to have a job after that. And they kind of just think of it linearly. But I always knew that I was going to be doing a lot of different things. I grew up wanting to be a businessman and CEO. So I knew I had that entrepreneurial spirit built in there. I also knew I didn't really want to go to college. But when I kept looking for colleges and that kind of thing, I still couldn't find one based around a degree that I wanted to pursue. So I ended up creating my own. And when you create your own, people are going to be like, well, how can you prove that? So I decided to document my journey, which is how Gary Vee actually talks about it. By documenting, I was creating content and building up my personal brand. And that's what PolyInnovator is to me. It's my online persona or essence, so to speak, reputation. Okay. And so everything I do through that can be through phases or whatever kind of content I create can be the topics for every future career that I have. So for example, I teach exercise and fitness. So I'm going to make content around there because that's a career I've had in life. I want to work in game development down the line or create music down the line. I want to have some sort of platform to build off of to actually be able to do those things.
Okay. So, did I lose you?
I'm back.
It glitched out there for a second.
Well, I'm here.
There we go. Okay. So we're back.
Yeah.
I never lost the voice. Just all of a sudden, you disappeared off the screen. But so how does that? At the end of the day, I understand it would be very interesting. A lot of people that are successful or famous at some point they had documented all the things they went through, and it would be interesting to see. There's a few of them out there, but I don't know, maybe like a Steve Jobs, for example. Somebody way back then, if you documented all his trials and tribulations through the years and then revisit them in 20, 30 years, I feel like he'd have a lot different perspective, but at the time, that was the perspective he had, so it would be interesting to see. So if you wanted to head towards gaming, how does this help you as far as, I mean, it seems to me you would just go do game.
Yeah. Well, the thing is about phases. I approach it in this idea of like, okay, this phase I'm going to focus on this next phase I'll focus on that. And throughout each phase, I'm not throwing away the other previous ones. They'll just kind of put on the side burner, so to speak. And I pursued that self-education endeavor that I was basically like a do-it-yourself degree. I call it the Modular Degree now. And this first phase has become around this concept of self-education and online learning. And how do you organize that? How do you actually create your own education? And so that's what my first phase eventually became. And over the past year, I started doing interviews on my show as well. And so that kind of was like a pseudo phase in between. And this next one that I'm focusing on is exercise, because I just stopped teaching fitness this past month for my classes. I still teach personal training and swimming, but my fitness classes that I was doing, I'm no longer doing. So it's kind of a big change for me. I thought this was the perfect time to start creating content around exercise and swimming, that kind of thing. So I almost started this phase 2, if you will. But I'm still going to be talking about education. I'm still going to be doing interviews, that kind of thing. It's more about adding to the plate without overextending, so to speak.
So if everything went perfectly, how does this all turn out for you in 10 years?
That's an interesting question. I haven't been approached this way before because it's one of those things where a lot of people get caught up in the polymathy or the jack of all trades kind of thing, but they never thought about like my life per se. So thank you. When it comes to the idea of like where am I going to be, I want to create a platform for myself so that I can do bigger things in the world. So one of the things I wanted to do is unite people who are innovators and polymathic people together. So 10 years down the line, hopefully I've done that. But if not, hopefully by that point, I've written many books, I've done many courses, I've made many courses, as well as created hundreds of content, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I'm already at 200 blog posts or so, 180 videos, 180 podcasts. So I'm already getting quite there. But I wanted to share my knowledge with what I learned of the world, and throughout that process, maybe do a gaming channel as well, do swimming, and then probably as well just doing all kinds of other stuff.
Sure. So is your business model? I mean, is this all your content? Is this sort of a passion project, or is it something that you're trying to monetize down the road, or as you go through it, or what's your goal there?
Both, really. I mean, content itself can be monetized, which I don't believe in the whole over monetization of content. Like, you should be able to create stuff for free for people out there. And I've created hundreds already, so obviously I'm doing that. But I did start out on like WordPress, for example, and that was free. But I moved over to Medium, and Medium was really cool because it allowed you to get paid for your content. And I ended up getting paid for it and getting that proof of concept. But I realized that they were overdoing it with the like monetization and membership model. I decided that I'm going to move to Ghost and have this membership on there every month. I'll create at least one massive, really resourceful and in-depth blog post. I've already made half a dozen at this point, and they're usually a few thousand words, if not like 4,000 words. And so they're really long posts and really high quality. I know that if I were to have someone read that, I think it'd be worth money to read it because it's well made and well informational. But I also create tons of free content as well. And so I'll have that whole consistency layer of my OmniContent and free content. And then on my website, have the paid content, as well as there's actually a tool you might be interested in too. It's called special.tv, where you create your own YouTube channel basically on there, but it's also a mix of like it's a mix of like Netflix and YouTube, which is really cool. So you can have your own subscription platform like a channel, but people can pay you for the paid content, and they have free content on there too. And so that's where I was going to put my courses, is on that platform. So I'll make my swimming courses, which is something I've been teaching for a long time, like I said, and that way people are like, hey, I want to learn from this guy. I can scale that up. And I think that's pretty cool.
I got you. So at the end of the day, you're building a following, and you're hoping that following follows you to the subscription side of things.
Yeah. And on top of that too, I mean, I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube and Instagram, I'm on all these different platforms. So I'm creating stuff on there. And so who knows, maybe down the line too, I can do more sponsorships and affiliates. But I'm not like I said, I'm not in it for the money per se. I'm in it to build more things. And with money, I can build more things. And that's the motivation behind monetizing.
And it's always good to be able to pay your bills. I mean, that's at the end of the day, and stay alive. So that's a good thing.
At one point I had to have like 3 jobs just to pay the bills and then do this on top of that.
Right. One of the things I've found in life, because I think I've been around a little longer than you have, is the stuff that I did in my 20s, or even in my teenage years or 30s, prepared me for things that I didn't realize I was going to do or use that skill. So, for example, it sounds like you're doing an awful lot of you have to be doing tons of editing work, and you sounds like you have a pretty firm grasp of everything from uploading to fixing to everything with online content. It sounds like you're taking a crash course in. And at some point down the road, there's probably going to be an opportunity that just pops up, and you're not going to realize it, but you're training yourself for that. You just don't know what it is yet. So I've looked back at a lot of things that I've done, and I'm like, oh, if I wouldn't have taken that dumb TV class in high school that seemed like it was just a good way not to be in math class or whatever, I wouldn't have had the knowledge to do this thing or that thing, So I think it's good to have a really broad base of random things you just like doing. So.
Well, and a lot of it wasn't even random too. It was interesting how growing up, I took classes specifically because I thought they would help me with my goals. So even back in 7th grade, I took a keyboarding class so I could learn how to type. And that's like, no one chose to take that class besides me, basically. But it's come in handy every day since. And when I got to high school, I actually got really excited because they had digital media, which would do web design, graphics design, movie design, video work and whatnot. And then after that, I took 2 classes. One that was more digital media based, like video editing, and the other one was web design after that too. So I actually had all that back in high school.
Sure.
Not to mention I started my blog like 10 years ago too when I was in high school.
Right.
And so it was one of those things where, yeah, it definitely connected to where it is now.
Right. Well, the other good thing is you can read a book about driving a car with a manual transmission, and then when you get in there, it's a way different thing. So having that knowledge and then actually doing it is that's killer. So that's awesome. I read a lot of your blog posts. How do you get? You're a great writer. How do you come up with ideas for your posts? I mean, obviously, you have some current type things that are going on in your life, and then you have some other things more of a philosophical thinking about topics. So where does that come from?
Well, I'm glad you took it out because there's so much on there too. It's one of those things where talk about it on the podcast is super exciting. I actually wrote at least 3 over this past weekend, let alone built out 2 more to be built down the line. When it comes to blog post ideas, the HubSpot generator was definitely very helpful, but I haven't even got to those posts yet. At this point, I have so many that I want to create right off the bat. And on top of that too, I have stuff that's documentation. So for example, there's an author named Derek Severs who came up with this idea of a now page. And the now page is something you update every month or so, just telling what you're doing professionally and personally in your life. And I thought that was super cool. Mm-hmm. But the way he approached it, and where a lot of other people approached it, was that it would just replace every month. And so you just re-edit that HTML and then replace it. I thought it'd be really cool to keep it as a documentation or like a history. And so I changed it into like a content type and whatnot. And so every month, I make a new now page update. I also do a video vlog of it too, which is fun. And that's just one thing I do once a month, let alone the monthly like long form blog posts, which usually hit me in a weird kind of just flow state where I was like, hey, I'm really interested in this topic. So literally, I think it was last Friday, I was researching metaverse, Web3, blockchain, and NFTs, all these different topics that are all interrelated. And I just was doing my own research on it, just watching a lot of videos, reading a lot of blog posts, learning from the experts that are talking about it right now. And I mean, at that point, I was just regurgitating in that blog post and just sharing what I learned. But it was a great way of organizing my ideas, learning more, and by showing that I could teach some other people about it, I knew it well enough to actually be able to do something about it. But that's kind of where this happened.
You brought it up. Can you explain what the hell an NFT is? Because I've started to read about it a couple times, and then I'm just like, I don't get it.
Well, the name doesn't really help too.
I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a non-fungible token. So in a basic essence, it's one of those things where people can't copy it. So I've been seeing a ton of TikTok videos on this, for example, where a guy paid for an NFT, he paid for this image, but he owns the original image. And the comment section would be like, hey, like he tells his comments, you can't steal this from me, it's mine. And 1,000 people who had commented on that video stole the image, put it as their profile picture, and now all the comments have the same profile picture. But the problem is none of them could ever resell that picture because they don't have the original code, the original blockchain of that picture on their user. Like they don't have that code. They don't own that picture. And so if anyone ever tried to resell it, they wouldn't be able to do so because the blockchain will say, hey, they don't have the original code. Even if they try to fake it, it won't match. And so they can't do anything with it. It won't accept that. Whereas the original guy could always resell it to somebody because he has that code and he can give that code to another person and they'll say, okay, hey, this means that this person actually owns this particular item.
Sure.
That helps explain it.
Sort of. Where I sort of understood that part, but it seems like it's only if you're working on the same platform unilaterally. So that's where I got confused. So if you bought an NFT in a certain whichever blockchain you want, you could right now be like, hey, John, could you just give me $100 bill for this? And then I'll just send it over to you. Or if you follow what I'm saying, like, or I could copy that image and resell it for cash. Or that's where I was getting confused because it seems like if we were all perfectly honest traders and citizens and we all worked on the same platform, that works. But this is what I didn't understand. Like, why couldn't I have just taken that image and said to somebody on PayPal, hey, send me a PayPal for this, and I'll sell you that image, the quote-unquote rights to it?
Well, it's not quote-unquote rights because it's that chain. You get a unique chain for that image, And without that chain, you can't own that image. Sure, you could save it to your computer, but you would never own the original image. It's like owning the original Mona Lisa, for example. There's a difference between having a copy of it and having the original piece. And whenever you have a blockchain, it's all registered on this long chain of information. And so anytime any transaction transpires, a little edit gets added to that chain. And so there's history behind that image. If you were to try to take that image, you won't be on that history. Now, when it comes to the platform as well, the actual blockchain itself can be accessed from multiple different like websites, for example. But you have to be on that same blockchain. You can transfer different chains together. So if you wanted to buy Ethereum with Bitcoin, you can do that kind of transaction. But you have to use that same. You have to one part of that has to be part of that blockchain. Like you have to be working with Ethereum at some point in that transaction, so to speak.
So let's just flesh this out in an example. So let's just say somebody took a still of this image right now, because who wouldn't want a picture of a couple handsome fellas, and then somebody bought that for 1,000 whatever. Just say whatever it is. The idea would be, if of course it's going to go viral as soon as one person sees this, everybody's going to want this picture. They copy it and try and start selling the rights without that original NFT, that you'd be able to legally go back and go, hey, I actually own this. Here's the documentation, and then go forth with some sort of suit or something of that sort. So this is what I'm getting at. It's like the practical. I understand it for like a fun online thing, but I'm trying to get into like the practical application of it is where I'm starting to struggle.
I don't
because
think
that would
you
prove
misunderstand
ownership.
it. Yeah. Well, I mean, no, not necessarily prove ownership, because the proving ownership happens on the blockchain. If you don't have the information for that, like if you don't have the original code, then you can't own the image. Which, sure, you could try to steal it, but it won't necessarily work. And then we would have to originally put the image on the blockchain for it to count in the first place, too. So, like, if we took a still of this, we'd have to put it on whatever the platform it was.
Okay. So it really only works platform by platform, is what.
And it works blockchain by blockchain. So you have to be, because I'm not necessarily familiar with all the storefronts and different NFT. Like I know there's like OpenSea and stuff like that, but I haven't bought many NFTs myself yet, so I can't speak too much on it per se.
So give me. I guess I'm probably sound like the dumbest human in the world in this conversation, but give me a real life, for instance, of something you would buy and then what you would. I mean, or is it something you buy in hopes that it's potentially going to increase in value and then you could sell it again in the future? Like kind of like scalpers do with tickets now. They'll buy tickets in the future, and then as the date comes up, you're like, here, these are worth double now, and I'll sell them.
Yeah. I mean, right now they're kind of acting like a mini art trade. So like when you buy a NFT, it's going to be more along the lines of like, hey, this is a piece of art you can buy and it'll appreciate the value. But Gary Vee, who's someone I linked a lot in that blog post I mentioned, he's been talking about NFTs for the past year, and I've known about them for the past few years, but there wasn't really much of a reason to dig into them up until the past 8 months or so. And what he mentioned is that like that ticket you talked about for the game. That isn't something that would just be a ticket. Like you wouldn't have a physical thing. It would be an actual NFT itself. And so if you wanted to sell that ticket, you would have to sell it with the hash link that comes with it.
Got you.
And in order to actually use it and actually get into the game.
Got you. So we're really talking about digital products on some level more than physical products.
Yeah.
Okay. That clears it up. I thought, for some reason, I got confused somewhere along the way and thought people were basically buying NFTs for literally everything in the whole wide world, and I was having trouble making any sense of it.
Well, you might have got confused because of the whole metaverse aspect. Because the whole digital world that they're trying to create, such as, like, there's this one that's like the Central Land or something like that, where they have a certain amount of land, like they're saying there's 9 pieces here, right? And each piece is worth however much crypto. And if you buy that land, then it's just like beachfront property down in Florida, right? When you buy that beachfront property, you can build a house or a hotel on it and sell it to whoever wants to build that hotel. And that's kind of what's happening right now. But that land is in itself, to my understanding, an NFT. But it's a digital land. It's not real, actual, like, dirt. And so that's what's really interesting is, like, right now there's kind of like this gold rush of, like, hey, which metaverse is going to be the biggest one? Because Facebook is not the only one. Right. And which land to buy is the best, so to speak.
So a perfect like example in my head would be if at some point you could buy an NFT for the banner ad on every person in the world's Facebook page.
Hmm.
That's
I don't know if it'll work like that per se, and it really depends on how Facebook would approach the ads. I mean, it could probably do that, but theoretically possible.
I guess what I'm saying is it's a digital space that
Mhm.
is going to retreat or receive tons and tons of traffic that would have some value. That if you were especially commercial minded, that you're going to end up literally billions of people seeing that on a daily basis.
Mhm.
I guess I can see it. I'm having, like I said, I'm thinking of when I hear of digital land. I'm watching my daughter play Roblox in
Yeah.
those games, and she builds a house and she goes and delivers pizza for a while, and it's her house, but I don't know who I'd sell that to. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, my sister's on Roblox and she's selling all her little animals that are people, and she was racking up a whole bunch
Really?
of like animals to get like this to sell and trade. And I mean, that's kind of the same idea. One thing I wanted to point out, and this is not to be disrespectful at all, your question you asked about the Facebook thing, I would say it's approached from a Web 2 mindset, Web 2.0 mindset. What we're talking about is a Web 3.0.
Okay.
So, like I said, I say this with the most respect possible. It's like saying, it's asking about like a square when we're talking about a cube.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sort of, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So how do you envision, Web 3.0, what's going to be different than what we have now? Like I see like the virtual space of a lot of things where I could see somewhere in the future, your business, you basically have a virtual storefront of some sort or meeting place where you sort of enter and conduct business just like you're in real life and things of that nature. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about, or is it something way beyond that I'm not even grasping? Okay.
I would say both, because it's like you mentioned, Roblox is a good example, or Ready Player One, or let's say like because the Oasis from Ready Player One is kind of what the metaverse is essentially going to become. At least that's what we're kind of envisioning as people who are in the space, so to speak. But it's kind of like decentralizing the platforms too. Like metaverse itself as a concept is just a term used to try to explain what the new way of the internet's going to be, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. I'm just trying to wrap my brain around it all.
And I'm trying to help too. I'm trying to think of like, I think we're reaching the limits of my knowledge on this particular thing, and I don't like admitting that. I like being able to be the person that knows stuff,
Right.
but I mean, at this point, I might as well just say it, so that way I don't waste your time, so to speak.
Right. Well, it's crazy. A lot of these things, they almost never turn out to be what you think they were going to be. There's always some weird little tangent that gets hold and takes it in a direction that nobody could have expected. And it's usually for the dumbest reason in the whole wide world too. It's just some crazy little tangent. I mean, take a look at Amazon. He was selling books. Like if you would have thought at the beginning of that, you're like, this book thing online, it's going to kill everything eventually. But there's no way to know that.
Well, and I've talked a lot about the future of social media, and that's because there's actually blockchain-based social networks now. And for example, there's Hive.blog, which is a Medium and Reddit combo kind of thing, where you have your blog posts, but it's all on the blockchain. So everything you create on there is decentralized, and it's all these democratic kind of experiences. So if you find something that's not good, like let's say someone abusing somebody, and for some reason they posted that because they're psycho or whatever, you can downvote it, kind of thing, and people start pushing it down, and eventually it gets to a point where no one's ever going to see it. Unlike Facebook, where it's a central authority, a central system, where they're the ones trying to moderate everything, which is like we do need moderation. We do need control over that, so that way people aren't sharing crazy stuff. But having it based on the people's way, it's probably more an efficient way of doing it. But on top of that too, it allows for a more democratic system. And for someone who's creating more content on there, you'll end up getting, if it's relatable to people and people actually engage with it, you'll get crypto for it. But you also get influence as well. And the more influence you have, you can spend that on the platform, or you can actually use it and just kind of hoard it in a way. And then you start building it up and you become a more influential person on that platform.
So here's a question for you. In a situation like that, let's just say we're living in the future and that is our kind of main medium. So let's just say you have something like the Chappelle special that came out here a couple months ago, and you had people who were radically one way or the other about it.
Mm-hmm.
So is the hope that, the people, if there was an overwhelming majority of people who dislike that content, it's going to get pushed down automatically. But if there's an overwhelming, a majority of people that do enjoy it, it's going to get pushed up regardless of, you know what I mean? Basically, it's going to be, like you said, more democratic like when you look at the Rotten Tomatoes on that special, it's like 95%. So it's sort of a little micro, example of that for people who are on Rotten Tomatoes. You know what I mean? So it's not overwhelmed with negative reviews from the other side, I guess is what I meant. So
I liked the special. I thought it was funny. And I think a lot of people don't like him as a person, so they bomb his show and that kind of thing. But it's in your example, it's very extreme. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what we're feeling right now. I've been on some social networks on blockchain that are just far left or far right, and I'm like, I don't want to be here because it's just political. Right. Yeah. And I don't usually agree with most people when it comes to politics, let alone an extreme on either side. And so I totally get what you're saying there. I would also say too, a majority of the population don't care about Dave Chappelle. As much as I love the guy, and I've seen his stuff for a long time. My opinion is one person, whereas a majority of people probably don't interact with him more than just seeing like, oh, there's an ad for his show. Oh, there's a news story about how he angered the trans people and that kind of thing. And so it's one of those things where, yes, it's extreme right now, but it'll eventually settle down. Or the mass will hit it. Because the early adopters are the extreme ones usually, in this case at least. And then once the mass of people come on there, it'll be a lot more smooth.
It'll even everything out a little bit. Sure. Makes sense. So you said you just quit one of your jobs. So what happens there? Quitting job's never easy. So
right. Well, it was more like resigning rather than quitting in the first place. It was one of those things where I started to burn out a little bit. I've definitely, even at my young age, I've experienced burnouts. And most of the time, the burnouts come from content creation, ironically. But this was the first time I really experienced it with work, at least at this degree. And the problem was I loved that job. I loved teaching. I loved the people that I was there with. So let's just give you a little backstory here. I started out as a teenager, 2 weeks before my 17th birthday, becoming a lifeguard. And from there, about a year in, I finally was able to become a swim instructor. I was talking to my boss at the time. I was like, hey, I want to do this. I love the kids. I love being able to teach. I love being in the pool. It's something I've always loved since I was young. So it was like the perfect first job, so to speak. And being able to teach, I just fell in love with it. I was able to do it really well. I taught every level from the babies, like who were 6 months old, all the way to like 73-year-old women or men, that kind of thing. And I could teach anybody. And from there, my third year became a pool manager, and at the same time became a waterbird instructor. I literally went into the office to my bosses one day. I was like, hey, can we talk about me becoming both of these things? And not 2 days later, someone didn't show up for the class. And so my boss said, hey, you could teach it. And I was like, okay. I mean, I was a little hesitant at first, but once I did it, I loved it. And I ended up teaching 5 to 13 classes a week for the past like 6 or 7 years. And so
that's
when
cool.
you start,
that's a lot.
Yeah. When you start teaching that much, plus swim lessons, plus personal training, plus 1 or 2 other jobs at a time, plus my own workout and the content, it starts to get kind of hectic and crazy. And eventually I stopped lifeguarding, I stopped pool managing, I stopped doing other jobs, and I just started, for the past couple of years, been surviving on that role as a personal trainer and fitness coach. And on top of that, teaching swim lessons outside of that place as well, because I got paid more for teaching people at their house. And so that's what I've been living off of. And then now at this point, I'm moving on because I just felt like it's about time to do so. I felt like I wasn't able to provide the same level of excitement and experience for people to have at that time.
So it's time to focus on you, basically, and your content. Yeah.
Well, I haven't rested this whole time, basically. Dude, the first weekend afterwards, I slept for 24 hours within a 2-day period. No joke, just 24 hours. Yeah.
Sure.
It's crazy.
Sure. So, on a piece of content, we'll just take a blog post, for example.
Okay.
How long does that take start to finish for you? So, I mean, you have, let's just say right now, some idea struck you and you're like, I need to write a blog post. I have some, information or feelings that I want to sharing this, is it a sit down, type it out, proofread it, post it, or is it a sketch and outline? Like how?
It depends. So yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to how long it takes me to make, it depends on how long the post is going to be. So there was one night I wrote a blog post about how to be omnichannel. I didn't write it that night actually. It was late at night and I was in that alpha wave state because when you're in the shower, when you're meditating, or when you are like right about the edge of sleep, you get into that alpha wave state, that creativity state. And I ended up getting that creative idea, and it's like, if I go to sleep, I'm going to lose this. I've been talking to people about content creation for a long time. I had been like throwing information around and distilling it more and more. And Gary Vee, for example, he talks about creating 100 pieces of content a day. And that's something like to most people sounds insane. To me, I understood. I just had to figure out how to do it. And it's still insane, but it was one of those things where I was like, okay, if you use systems, if you use tools, and if you use ways of creating and repurposing content as well, you can get it done. And it's not about creating 100 pieces. It's more about repurposing for the most part. But most people just didn't understand that. And looking at his slide deck was too macro. So I wanted to create a post that was more in detail and share the tools that I know and share my own experience with it. And I ended up writing an outline that was 3 times the length of my normal blog post.
Really?
Yeah. And then I went to sleep. And the next day I woke up and wrote like 4,000 words. The day after that, I wrote another 3,000. So it ended up being like a 7,000 word blog post. But that took a matter of a few days. Whereas other cases, I wrote a outline and then didn't touch it for like a year. And if you look at some of my databases, I have hundreds of ideas that like are just ready to go. My OmniContent's my main series, and I actually planned out the next 700 pieces. Now, if I'm going to skip some of those, I might, whatever. Who knows how long that's going to take, but I try to do it at least once a week, if not daily now. But that's one thing. But I also have other content pieces that are just isolated. They're not just OmniContent. They're just a blog post. And that's on a list of around 70. But honestly, I don't usually touch those. I usually just kind of like make a post and then add it to the database later on. Over the weekend, I used a tool by my recording tool called Riverside.fm. They made a tool like how to create a podcast name. And I was playing around with that. And in the effort of doing so, the words, The Art of Digital Productivity came out. And I was like, that's a really cool title right there. I like that. Not made for a show per se, but for a blog post, I'll definitely do it. And I wrote that blog post out, and it's not 2,500 words. And at the same time, I finished a blog post that has been sitting there for the past like 2 years. And then I took a nap. And during that nap, I had a couple ideas and got up during the middle. Well, it's more like a resting. It wasn't really truly asleep. I got up, wrote out 2 outlines, and went back to bed. And that's kind of what I did over the weekend even. And so that's just kind of happened. Does that answer your question?
So what kind of response are you looking for on those blogs? Are you trying to feed your current, we'll call them subscribers or members or followers, whatever you want to call them, or are you trying to slide something into the mainstream? When you're doing 100 pieces a day, I mean, honestly, you're probably going to have one gold, perfect, going to catch the stream. You know what I mean?
So, well, no. And the reason why I say no is that like I'm not currently doing 100 pieces a day. I may know how to do it. I may have done it at some points, but it's more of a journey to 100 pieces at this point because that is hard, especially as a solo creator. But I get what you mean. The quality of you think it's quantity over quality, and it's more about taking the quality and distilling it down to other platforms.
Sure. I see what you're saying. So basically, you might take 1 or 2 pieces of content and then expand them into smaller bits for other outlets.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the whole idea is taking your pillar piece, whether it's a video, blog post, or podcast, and then chopping it up for other platforms. So this podcast is going to have a few juicy quotes that you could take and make a clip on Instagram. You make a vertical clip and put it on YouTube Shorts and TikTok. You take a quote and you make it into an image. You put that on Instagram and Pinterest. And already right there, you have half a dozen, right?
Right.
And that's what it's all about. It's not about making 100 blog posts a day. It's about making 100 pieces of content. And that could be like 50 tweets, which obviously your Twitter followers will hate you. But it doesn't matter what it is and what platform it's on. It just matters that it's quality and that you're actually taking it from someone.
So what basically, like you said, instead of trying to hold somebody's nose and shoving the whole podcast down their throat, you're just going to take a little snippet that is attention grabbing and shoot that all over the place.
Well, and you don't necessarily share the same thing to every platform because every platform has its own context. Your own followers is different on there, and so you got to know your people. But just for example, too, my OmniContent I mentioned, I created that because I am a blogger. That's what I started out with, but I'm also a video creator. I'm also a podcaster. And so I wanted a way to do all three at once. And it took me a while to kind of figure this out. And most people will take, are you recording the video for this or just the audio?
Yep.
Okay.
Video.
So you have your video, then you have your audio, and then you can transcribe it and make it into a blog post. Perfect. Boom. Right there. You already made 3. That blog post can make like 10 tweets, and you can take a quote, make it into an image. And then you have the video and audio to make clips and audiograms and video memes out of. But for me, since I'm a blogger, I start from the blog post, which is usually kind of like anti the norm, so to speak. But I make a blog post, I use that as bullet points, and I make a video out of that. And then I cut the audio out and make my PolyCast. And that's kind of a cool way of doing it for my own way, because I'm more creative writing than I am on video. Like you prompt me with a question, I can give you a good answer. But if you just ask me, hey, explain yourself, I'm going to be stuttering over my words for a second. You know what I mean? Right.
So do you do this for other people, for other organizations? Have you ever thought of that?
Yeah, I have. I feel like, too, I've thought about the whole idea of creating content for other people, which I have written for other people. I've been paid for blog posts, but I haven't been paid for the OmniContent, so to speak. But I feel like I would burn out if I was doing it for someone else because I'm passionate about the content I create. And unless I could be passionate about the content I create for someone else, I don't know. Like, for example, Matchmaker, which I don't know if I should share this or not, but Matchmaker.fm, which we met on, since I was one of the founders, I've been on there since the beginning. They asked me to write a blog post for them about how to build a matchmaker profile. And I wrote out this really awesome blog post, and they made it seem like they were going to pay me for it. And then eventually they're like, oh, thanks for your submission. We decided to go with somebody else. And I was like, wait, what? You asked me to do this, regardless if you pay me or not, to use it. And it was just one of those things where I was passionate about that platform. I think I told you before the call that I reached out to over a few hundred different shows, let alone a couple hundred different people to come on my show when I was still looking for guests. And it was one of those things where when you're on a platform that much, you're going to learn how to make a good profile.
Right. And they just sort of
just tossed it basically. And I was like, okay, well, that leaves a sour note.
Yeah, I don't. So, what's crazy is I started doing a podcast way back, 2010, 11. And there's been various versions through the years. And this is the version that stayed the longest and has piqued my interest. Because a lot of times I was trying to do it for our business. And the weird thing about doing a podcast about your business is after you, we do pickup truck parts is our thing. So after I sit and talk to people all day about pickup truck parts, you know what the last thing I want to do? I'm done. I don't even want to answer. I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want anything to do with it. And it was really hard to get, the people that I talk to on a regular basis in the industry or whatever, to call them up and have this vanilla, awful conversation. Because I realized quickly, when I called those people to talk to them, we almost never talked about work stuff. We always talked about other random things or events we were going to or stuff that happened, and my interest was not in doing a podcast about truck parts or automotive stuff or anything like that. But what has amazed me is in the past 10 years, the amount of podcasts that have popped up. It's like, it blows my mind. For the smallest little niche, there's,
Yeah. Well, we're on the 9th or 10th wave of podcasting at this point. Yeah. And crazy. The 15th for blogging, and I think with videos it's around the same for podcasting, almost, maybe a little bit more. I don't keep up with the actual waves of it, but it was kind of funny because I started blogging around the same time you started podcasting, and I learned about social media marketing back in 2012, which is kind of ridiculous if you think about it. And since then, I've used half a dozen different content management tools for my blog. And then I started my podcast back in 2017-ish, 2016, or about 2017, I think. And so it's been 4 or 5 years at this point. And so I've been I've been through a few of the waves. Last year was a perfect example. Half the people on Matchmaker are dead in the water. It's kind of sad. And I told you, I reached out to hundreds of shows. Half of them haven't been seen in over a week, as they say.
Wow.
And it kind of sucks. And it's like, dang, this show looks really cool. And most of the time, they'll have updated episodes, but there's no longer on the platform. Or they've just stopped doing stuff altogether. December last year and February of this year is where a lot of the shows just dropped. And it sucks because they had some cool topics, too.
Do you think it was because of the pandemic? People sort of gave up on it? Yeah.
Yeah, well, they didn't realize how much work it was going to be. Like you mentioned earlier, editing. Editing is my biggest thing, and like I do an insane amount of research for my guests, and that's how I wanted to do it. Like I'll read someone's entire blog. I'll go on there and listen to every podcast they've been on. I'll look through the entire Instagram, whatever it takes to get the information I need. And because of that, I'll have some really interesting questions. People are like very happy. I had one guy who had been on countless shows, and he told me like you were the most well-researched and like interesting questions show I've been on. I was like, that's amazing, thank you. Yeah. And it was just it's one of those things where that's how I do it, and I spend way too much time doing that, like more than I probably should. But then the editing is the hardest part for me. It's kind of like what
I can't get it. So we usually, for the longest time, just till probably maybe 5-10 episodes ago. We were strictly audio only, which was, easy. Hit record, pull it into something, edit it, smooth everything out. The video thing, just dealing with the amount of data you have to push around, and instantly you realize why not many people do it.
Well, my biggest issue is transcribing. I can't find a tool. I mean, that's kind of a lie. I am trying out Otter AI. I know all the tools. I'm the tool guy. People ask me when they have a problem with a tool they can use, and I'll give you 12. It's insane, and I say that like modestly speaking, but it's one of those things where transcription tools usually have a limit of either size of the video, which is usually around 2 gigs, maybe 1 gig, or the length of the video, and sometimes just audio too, depends on what they can handle, and usually that's an hour or 2. On average, my episodes are an hour and a half, and it seems like we're going for a decent amount of time too, so you're going to approach that time too. It's like it's one of those things where it's great to have those long form episodes. I prefer them. I'm having a good time talking to you. But it makes it a hard time to edit sometimes too. And it's like, oh man, it is hard. Oh, well, quick, one last little tangent. My freaking editing software, DaVinci Resolve, I don't know if it's because of the update or what, got rid of the waveform. Like I just couldn't see it. They didn't change the setting. It just wasn't showing up. It was a glitch. And that's the main thing I look at when I edit my video. I can listen to it. I can watch it. I can look at the little images. That's fine. I need that waveform to see when they say or see where there's a pause and cut it up. It hasn't been there for my last 4 videos, and it's so frustrating. Yes.
And what frustrates me is when stuff like that happens, you get used to doing things a certain way. That's what happens to me all the time. And then all of a sudden one day I'm like, what normally takes me an hour is now going to take me 5. Because now I have to figure out the whole new way to do absolutely.
It took me a whole week to get this one episode.
That's crazy. Ridiculous. Crazy.
Well, and there's certain things like speeding up the video, which helps a lot too. Pressing like Shift L or something like that. It's nice.
There's a lot into it. And what does surprise me all the time is the amount of people that I've seen that are going to do a podcast or going to do a video blog or whatever. The amount of people that actually stick to it is probably close to 0. I would love to know what the drop off curve is past maybe 1, 2, or 3 of anything. Because what's weird is you have to do like a ton of them to finally just gain traction and the knowledge and the ability to keep going. But I see all the time on either be Facebook or Twitter or something. Hey, I've started a new blog, and you read a couple blog posts and you're like, well, that's great. This guy has some nice perspective. There's one in particular. This guy started a blog, guy I really like, and I was like, well, this is great. I read the first post, awesome. Like I was like, wow, this is really good. He has a good future. Read the second one, awesome. That was it.
That's it.
And then I saw him 6 months later, and I'm like, dude, what happened to the blog? He's like, it was way more work than I thought it would be.
No, I think with video podcasts in particular, this is just kind of a guesstimate because I have seen many. I've been on over 50 different shows myself, so I've had experience with many different shows. Oftentimes with a video one, it's like 12 to 36 kind of shows. Once they get past that hurdle, usually they stick around. But I mean, at some points too, people like you will change different shows. They'll work on a different show or something like that. Yeah. I made my PolyCast. I don't really call it a podcast unless I have to, but like I call it PolyCast because of poly, meaning much or many. I didn't ever explain polymath earlier. Polymath is someone with many areas of knowledge for those who are listening in this whole time. But the PolyCast is on that same idea. Many topics, many ideas, many kinds of people. And that way I have a lot of options for what I'm doing. And so if I ever do want to change, like for gaming or for any other phase down the line, I have that platform to do so. I'm not limited to just the niche of my show.
Right.
Like your show is open to anything basically, which is great.
Right. Basically, yeah. Because that's what I found was the most interesting to me. Just instead of just having the same type of people all the time, because what I do find is, so let's just say like marketing people, and especially being in business forever. Oh my God, I can almost give most marketing people sales pitch because I've heard so many of them, and it's just the same thing over and over and over and over. Usually said in a few different ways. But every one of these little niches, they're almost, there is some original thought in it, but it's a lot of just the same shit. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. So I like last week I talked to some Australian dude, comedian guy. It's a good conversation about random things. Next week there's some guy, something about cults. He wrote a book about cults. It just the most like random,
far out.
Yeah, like they're not even going to be close to the same conversations over and over again, and that's what I like. I just enjoy being able to do that. So
yeah, a lot of my shows are like that too. One of my biggest guests I talk about is Merritt Moore, Dr. Merritt Moore. I might have to edit that part there. Dr. Merritt Moore. She is a quantum physicist and a professional ballerina. It's like, what? That's a crazy combination. Yeah. She does it well. And on top of that, she's becoming a future astronaut, so to speak. Really? And that's crazy. And I say crazy as an impressive, because it's one of those things where I believe 100% she's going to be able to do it because of the way we had our conversation, the way I know what she does, and I think she's going to do it.
So is she going to be like a NASA astronaut or like a private?
I think she's just trying to find any way of just being able to go to space, so to speak, because I keep saying so to speak today. Well, she's trying to. She thinks she tried going through NASA, and I think she might still go through NASA. But there was one guy in China who was offering 10 spots to people who are like artists and stuff like that too. If you can impress him well enough to get his attention, he'll have you on his stage. So I think any opportunity, she's an opportunist like myself, and so I think that's kind of the idea.
So if you were offered a chance to go to space on one of these rides, would you go?
Yeah,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
See, I'm a little older. I was watching the documentary on I can't remember what it was the SpaceX. I don't know if you saw it. It just came out. I can't remember what they call it. They had the 4 people that they chose to go up above the space. I don't know if they did it or not. I didn't get to the end of the documentary. I don't remember seeing it on the news. But I don't know. I don't want to be the first guy. I'm willing to be like the 10th guy. But the first 4 people to go, I'll just watch that on the news, see how it works out for them.
Well, and I'll have to do a lot of preparation for it too. Like that's one thing that Merritt's doing quite well. She's like preparing as best she can. She's a ballerina. She's obviously physically able to, and she's super smart. She does quantum physics and laser physics, so like she knows a lot of the physics aspect. So she's learning robotics to try to get her way into it. NASA, for example, and so I think there's a lot of other preparation involved as well. So I'm wondering about that.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
And don't take this the wrong way, but what's it like to go out on a date with you? I feel like you're just like you just got so much going on in your head all the time.
Well, I would also listen to my show as well because I can shut up. Believe it or not.
I wasn't saying that. I was just saying like there's so much going on.
And I mean, to be quite honest, this is relatively tame on this show. And this show, like we've already talked about a lot of different things, and I talk fast, but I feel like I still am holding back a little bit, ironically. Oh, yeah? And one of my swim lessons even told me, you're like a stock reel of information. Yes. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. But conversely to that, I do care. Like if I ask someone out, I care about that person, obviously, and I want to spend time with them, and I can active listen, and I can do so, and I try to do so when you're speaking too. I'm not trying to interrupt you at any means. And so actually, as a host for my show, I already knew how I really wanted to structure the show, what kind of people I wanted to have on, and as a content creator and a systems thinker, I was able to get the whole kind of like structure and ideas and tracking and all the techies part of it down. Mm-hmm. What I did know that I didn't know well was how to shut up and active listen as well. Like I could possibly do it, but it wasn't a skill I was good at. So the first major skill I learned as a podcast host was to active listen.
Right.
And you can see some of my first episodes. I'm like struggling there a little bit. You can see a sweat coming down. No, I was kidding. but it's one of those things where it was a skill I practiced, and I've had 96 people on my show since last May, and I've been able to do it pretty well, I would say. In fact, one of my friends in town, she watched one of my interviews, and she's like, I didn't know you could shut up for that long. So I would say go on a date with me would be good, because I would pick a good place, I'd be creative with it, and I'd be able to listen to you as well.
Sure. Yeah, I just fully expect like just a regular, really isn't. Well, you might not go out. I guess you'd probably be a little more choosy. You wouldn't probably just be with a Valley Girl type person that doesn't care about anything. So
yeah, I don't date too often even right now, just purely because it's not worth it. This person's interesting, you know.
Right. So I was just thinking that though, that in a regular conversation, when you're not throttled, you're just letting it all out.
Well, and I mean, like I said, like I'm holding back a little bit here, but not much. And most shows I have to hold back a lot more because they are more niche, so to speak. So I feel more comfortable on this show. But I'm just saying, like, yeah, it's interesting. Just if you get me going on something, and we still have time to do more if you want, like we'll have plenty of information to go off of.
Sure. So what's it like to teach people how to swim? That was the one I saw in all of your stuff that I was. It seems like one of those things that has to be very tough because you have to get over their first fear of drowning, which is I've noticed is a real struggle as I watch my nieces and nephews and other family members learn how to swim.
Yeah.
And then, like, how do you even start somebody out that doesn't know anything about anything? Like, literally, a 10-year-old kid or a 25-year-old person or a 40-year-old person that has never swam before?
Well, it doesn't really even matter about age. If they're younger, they're actually a bit more malleable. As we get older, we're more set in our ways, and so it's usually harder to teach someone older than younger. But there is that innate fear. But I've seen kids who are 3 years old who are fish in the water. Literally, you put them in, you have to stop them from drowning because they just want to keep going. And there's other people who were 2 years old or 7 years old who will scream bloody murder if you get them to step in the pool. I had one kid who, I think he was 4 when I started teaching him, and by the time I stopped, he was around 5. Within that time span, though, I couldn't even put him in the baby pool. We would sit next to each other for almost an entire session, so like 6 lessons. We were just sitting there, playing in the water, doing some of the most basic of movements, and I'm very like strict. I don't do any doggy paddle or anything like that unless I absolutely have to. Like I actually say, no dying, listen, and no doggy paddle. Those are my 3 rules. And the thing is, because of that, people are forced to actually level up.
Right.
And by the end of the time I was with that kid, he was face down in the water, arms coming out of the water and swimming. And he's like, what, this tall? And he's probably close to 10 now. Wow, makes me feel old. But so yeah, some of the kids I taught actually became lifeguards later on, which was like, ooh,
sure,
getting up there. But when it comes to teaching someone, I call it the 3 P's of swimming. You have the psychology, the physics, and the philosophy of it. And when you can break it down into those kind of meta areas, you have to be able to find ways of teaching that to a person. Usually, people fall into one of those categories. Either they're confident and they're not worried about drowning, they know how to hold their breath, or they're willing to learn to hold their breath, and it's just mechanics. It's just the physics of air in the lungs. Like, make sure you hold enough air here, tension, so that way water can't go in.
Sure. And
once you learn that, it's literally just learning the mechanics of moving your arms, kicking your legs, and getting through the water. And then at that point, it's physics. But sometimes it's philosophy. People want to know why you're doing it one way. Why can't I smack my hand in the water? Like, why do I have to dive it? And that's a philosophy aspect. Like, why do we have to do it this way? Why is it the flow of the water? You don't want to fight the water. You want to go with the wave, so to speak. And then finally, it could be the psychology of it, which oftentimes it is the case where it's like, hey, I have a fear of doing this. And once you show people, like, hey, you can be fine. You plug your nose. You have to relax.
Right.
I'm right here. I was a lifeguard. There's a lifeguard right here. And the water at the deepest point is 4 feet. What's the worst that could happen? You'll just stand up, right? And you explain it like that, simply. And most people are like, okay, cool. That makes sense.
Right.
You can hold their hands. You can hold them up, whatever it takes. And eventually, they'll start blowing bubbles. They'll start being able to feel comfortable. You put their face down, and they swim from there.
That's cool. I can't. God bless you. I can't imagine doing it. It seems like a struggle, especially like I just picture like 60 and 70-year-old people coming in, and for whatever reason they decide they want to learn how to swim, and it's got to be the most challenging thing in the the whole wide world. Like little kids, I think would be relatively, I don't want to say easy, but
They're malleable.
easier. Yeah. Whereas,
I mean, I've had great lessons that are 60 years old, 65 years old too. It just depends on the person, really. Like I've had kids who were way worse than adults, but I've had adults who are way worse than kids. Like it really just depends on the person.
Sure.
It's a great way of understanding people too, because then you get a lot of data sets that way.
Oh yeah. You probably get a whole lot of different philosophies and psychologies, and then throw in a few different body types, and
yeah,
it's a whole different world.
I had this tall, lanky dude that was kind of hard to figure out with him.
The exact perfect way. So, is there any way that you do online swim? Was it online swimming lessons you said you were doing? Or?
No, I want to do something like that. That's a great little switch way there, because this next phase of content is around exercise. And since swimming is one of my biggest things of exercise, I do torso training on the dry land, and I've taught myself over the past 12 years how to exercise well and be able to get stronger and that kind of thing. You can't really see it on the camera, but obviously I'm fit. I know what I'm talking about, but it's one of those things where how can I show people I know what I'm talking about? Well, you create content. You create a consistency layer over time. People say, they see your content, they see your videos, your blog post. Eventually, you can create a book, and you can create a blog course, and a long form blog post, that kind of thing. People can pay for that, and they'll be able to get that experience that way. I actually bought this little action camera with a little waterproof case, so that way I could put it underwater and show myself swimming. And that's one thing I want to do, is create a swimming course. Before that, though, I'm actually writing a swimming book, and it's called The Philosophy and Hydrodynamics of Swimming. And that way I get into the whole nitty gritty aspect, but also get macro as well.
Mm-hmm. Sweet. Well, sounds like you got a lot going on, sir.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I wanted to create that consistency layer, so content, but then on top of that, build the big pieces. Over the past weekend, half a dozen blog posts, and I'm just only getting started.
Well, that's great, man. Well, we've come to the end of our hour here, and I'm probably holding you up for at least 300 more blog posts tonight, and God knows what else. So I really appreciate you doing this, man. You're an interesting fella, and sounds like you got a talent and good future ahead of you, I think.
Thank you, John. I'm glad we finally were able to get this done, because I know that we had a couple issues there on my end. It was having this time difference.
No worries, man. No worries at all. Happens. So, well, bud, it was good talking to you, and we'll probably have to do this again in the future. Maybe check in with you and see where you're at.
For sure. If anybody wants to find me, it's PolyInnovator on every platform, or PolyInnovator.space is the website.
All right, and I'll share all the show notes the links in the show notes, so everybody can reach out and find you. So thanks a lot, man.
Bye.
See ya.